you so much. Thank you, Susan. Good morning, everybody. It's great to see all of you here on a beautiful Los Angeles day. I am Joe Laszlo, and I am the Vice President of Industry Initiatives at the Interactive Advertising Bureau. And in terms of what that means, well, you know, if it's in our industry, digital media, and it's an initiative, it's kind of my job to keep an eye on it as the IAB manages a whole host of different projects on different topics, and just kind of make sure that the IAB as an organization is kind of all pulling in the same direction and helping our members and friends throughout the industry grow the business. Before we get into the substance of the day, I should say, if any of you in your past careers before entering the exciting world of digital media was in the armed services, happy Veterans Day and thank you for your service. And if any of you have relatives or friends who are in the armed services, do text, call, reach out to them on social media, whatever the kids are doing these days, and tell them you're thinking about them. Also, happy Diwali to those who are celebrating. It's a day full of festivities above and beyond the world of programmatic media. I want to do a quick level set just to kind of get a sense of who's in the room or level of expertise. With a topic like programmatic, it's a little bit difficult sometimes to program an event to figure out the right level. So how many of you, just raise your hands if you consider yourself a relative novice to the world of programmatic and exchanges and automation? Okay, how many of you consider yourself sort of in the middle, intermediate as far as your level of expertise goes? Okay, it's kind of even so far. And how many of you consider yourselves experts, like total programmatic, you know? Okay, that's awesome, that's awesome. How many of you know what inverse Bayesian retargeting is? Show of hands, anybody? I just made that up, so it doesn't exist yet. So good, you're on your toes. I appreciate it. I wanted to start before turning the floor over to people who know far, far more about programmatic than I do. I wanted to start by giving you a little IAB perspective on how we are defining or redefining programmatic. Because I mean, I think programmatic, even in our world of slippery terms and jargon, is a fairly slippery term. I tend to think about the Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, who in 1964, in a very famous decision about pornography, said, I'm not really going to define what pornography is. I'm just going to tell you I know it when I see it. And I think if Justice Stewart were still on the bench today, you know, and he were in a slightly different case, he could strike out pornographic material and replace it with programmatic, and that would still be true, right? I mean, it's a little tough to put into words what programmatic is, but we all kind of know it when we see it. It's also important to note that, you know, we're like several years into the programmatic revolution. The IAB released our first digital simplified document speaking to defining the terms of programmatic, the kinds of programmatic transactions that there were in September of 2013. So it's been a couple years. So I want to go through 7 major themes, major issues, major topics of discussion that the agenda later on today in the conference is going to touch on. The first is programmatic creative, right? How does the world of programmatic, of automation, change the way we design ads, build ads? How much can we tailor ads using automation to make them more relevant to the people who are seeing them? So programmatic creative is number one. Building trust is the second one. Programmatic is redefining relationships between buyers and sellers, between media agencies and their clients, between technology vendors and their clients. How do we as an industry foster trust between all of the different people in the value chain in a world where programmatic and automation are the rule of the day? Premium formats. A lot of programmatic buying today is fairly basic ads, you know, kind of little rectangular standard ad sizes, which are great, but we could do more. And so the shift to using programmatic to buy and sell premium formats, be it video, be it advanced in-app ads on mobile devices, is another major issue that we'll be talking about. The impact that programmatic has on measurement and a shift to like measuring what's going on with an ad campaign in real time when that campaign is being trafficked programmatically is another big challenge and another theme or issue we'll talk about in the course of the day. We should talk about the private parts of the industry, right? PMPs, private marketplaces, are hugely interesting, a very exciting, dynamic part of the overall programmatic landscape. But there's still some confusion about exactly what those are, much less programmatic as a whole. And so we'll talk a little bit about the evolution of PMPs and how companies are using them successfully, how companies are managing multiple different PMP relationships with different buyers or sellers. We'll talk about what's coming next as well. Just as we're beginning to maybe get our sea legs around programmatic in the world of PC and mobile-based ad inventory, people are talking about programmatic TV, programmatic print buying even. And so that's something that we'll touch on in the course of the day. And then finally, and not least importantly, we'll talk about the human impact of programmatic too. We'll speak to how businesses are retooling, retraining their workforces for a world where what buying and selling means is a little different than it was even just a couple of years ago. So 7 big themes throughout the course of the day: creative, measurement, et cetera, and the human impact as well, will all be things that we touch on time and again in the course of the agenda. But I want to come back to this question of, well, what is programmatic? Can we pin ourselves down to some kind of, maybe even oversimplified, but some kind of definition of what programmatic is? And we, the IAB, commissioned PwC to do a study of just the market size, how much programmatic ad revenue is there in the marketplace as of 2014. And PwC had a lot of trouble doing that. I mean, they're consultants. People pay them big bucks to solve complex problems. But one of the big things that they came back to us with is, the companies that we talk to about how much programmatic revenue are you making or how much are you spending programmatically, they don't have a standardized definition of programmatic. And so PwC had to do a ton of normalization to try to get to that kind of common currency, common definition for what we're talking about here. So the IAB has been thinking about it a lot and has proposed this as sort of a straw man, probably too simple, but useful definition, working definition of programmatic. Programmatic is just automation plus data. It's the combination of automated buying and selling techniques with data as a value-added layer or an important input to the decision-making process about whether to transact or not to transact. I think it's oversimple, but it definitely kind of gives everybody a common starting point to have conversations about specific manifestations of programmatic. And there are definitely a lot of specific manifestations of programmatic, right? We've come a long way from the past, from say 3 years ago when programmatic generally was synonymous with real-time bidding or RTB, right? Auction-based transacting of unreserved ad inventory. There's really 2 kinds of unreserved auction-based transactions that go on these days. There's unreserved fixed, there's private marketplaces or automated guaranteed transactions. And again, different people use different terms for these specific kind of quadrants of possibility around programmatic, but we're trying to establish at least some baseline common terminology that people can use to speak the same language when they have these conversations. Going back to PwC's results, PwC's analysis for the IAB suggested that in 2014 there was about $10 billion worth of programmatic inventory transacted in the United States. 80% of programmatic was just display banner ads. So again, fairly simple creative types. We'd like to see that change to more interesting and engaging creative. About 70% of programmatic, according to PwC's study for us, was open auction. So RTB style programmatic still seems to dominate the landscape, although again, I think that's changing. And then in terms of who's collecting programmatic revenues, PwC found that about half, a little more than half, of the total revenue in the industry goes to people in the ad technology world as opposed to publishers. So all of these things, again, kind of feed back into the big issues around programmatic today, the big things that we want to be talking about on this stage and that you should be talking about with one another. I should say a quick word about the IAB's programmatic agenda. Without going into too much detail about it, we have a programmatic council comprised of members of the IAB, people from IAB member companies, that gets together regularly to discuss how the IAB can, again, kind of help the industry get into a common ground about programmatic. Our ad technology team, and you'll be hearing from my colleagues Melissa Gallo and Scott Cunningham later on today, have been really taking the lead in developing common standards for the industry in terms of making programmatic work better under the hood. OpenRTB and OpenDirect are the 2 most prominent of those, but there are a bunch of them. And I really like this idea of tackling programmatic illiteracy. Again, it's about helping the industry understand understand, learn a language around programmatic so that we can all talk to one another about it. And through our training and development programs, the IB is doing a lot of work there. And then finally, and again, this is something I want to come back to again and again today, just how do we adapt to a world where even if we all think we're used to constant change because we live in a digital world, the programmatic world is changing even faster than that. So how do we get used to yet more acceleration in terms of the pace of change, the pace of innovation in our industry? Wrapping it up and getting back to plain language, I was thinking, okay, I'm doing this conference in LA. How do I express in Los Angeles sort of terms the impact that programmatic is having on people, on businesses? And really, I think it comes down to two possible futures. If you go back to 3 years ago and you asked a salesperson or a media planner kind of what programmatic meant to them, this is probably what they would have thought of, right? My career is going to be terminated. The robots are going to come and take over everything, and it'll be a vast wasteland. Hopefully, in the 3 intervening years, the thought on programmatic has evolved, that we've all kind of come to realize that programmatic is really much more a cuddly robot, not an evil robot. It's more like WALL-E. It's doing the jobs that humans shouldn't have to do, the messy jobs that free us up to do the more interesting, more innovative end of the advertising transaction. So it's a choice, right? I mean, do we look at programmatic as a Terminator-style future or a WALL-E-style future, or maybe neither of those metaphors is appropriate, and there's some better robot out there that we can point to. But either way, I think programmatic is exciting. I want to thank you all for taking time out of your day to be here to learn more about it with me, and we'll be talking more throughout the course of the day. I'll be sort of your MC, so you'll see a lot of me between now and the drinks at the end. Before we jump to our first session, I have to say a quick thank you to the sponsors for today's event. Without them, without you, we wouldn't be here. Our principal sponsor is Demand Media. Our premier sponsors are Quantcast, Tremor Video, and the Rubicon Project. Our VIP sponsors are ComScore, Distillery, Rocket Fuel, and Yumi. And our supporting sponsors are Ads Native and FraudLogix. Let's give them all a big round of applause, and thank you for your support. Okay.